wanted one man, one rebel, one legend. So Edward gathered the largest army Scotland had ever seen. Before this story ends, William Wallace will lose everything. A king will die. A legend will be executed. But Scotland will not surrender. Wallace knew the victory at Stirling Bridge would not last forever. Somewhere beyond the border, Edward was already coming. And this time, the enemy was not another English commander. It was the King of England himself. Messengers arrived from across Scotland. Each carried the same warning. The English army was growing larger every day. Wallace gathered his captains. The future of Scotland would be decided soon. Some demanded an immediate battle. Others urged caution. Wallace listened carefully. He understood what many did not. Edward wanted one battle, one decisive victory. Wallace refused to give him that opportunity. Instead, Scotland would fight differently. Villagers began moving supplies away from English routes. Food was hidden. Livestock was moved into remote valleys. Bridges were watched carefully. Roads were monitored. Wallace wanted Edward to find an empty country. Every day, more volunteers joined the rebellion. Hunters, farmers, blacksmiths, men who had never fought before. They came because they believed Scotland could still be free. Wallace transformed them into an army. Spears rose across the highlands. Shields were repaired. Horses carried messages day and night. The entire kingdom was preparing for something enormous. Yet Wallace still avoided battle. He was waiting for Edward to make a mistake. And far beyond the border, the King of England was getting closer. In July 1298, Edward finally crossed into Scotland. Thousands of soldiers marched behind him. Knights rode at the front of the army. Longbowmen followed close behind. Supply wagons stretched for miles. Edward believed the campaign would end quickly. He expected Wallace to defend Scotland. He expected a battle. But Wallace had different plans. As the English advanced, they found almost nothing. Villages stood abandoned. Farms had been emptied. Food supplies had vanished. Livestock had disappeared. The Scots were denying Edward what every army needed: food. Day after day, the army pushed deeper into Scotland. Yet Wallace refused to appear. Scouts searched valleys and hills. They found tracks, campfires, signs of movement, but never Wallace himself. Frustration began spreading through the English rank. The weather grew worse. Supplies grew smaller. Tempers grew shorter. Some began questioning the campaign. Edward refused to stop. Every mile north increased his determination. Wallace was somewhere ahead, watching, waiting, and slowly, the King of England was being drawn deeper into Scotland. Exactly where Wallace wanted him. Edward entered Scotland looking for a battle. Instead, he found only shadows. The news reached Wallace quickly. Edward had found him. The long game was over. There would be no more hiding, no more retreating. The battle Wallace had avoided for months was finally here. Across the camp, preparations began immediately. Spears were inspected. Horses were fed and watered. Scottish army camp beneath dark evening sky. Some men spoke confidently of victory. Others remained silent. They had heard stories about Edward's army. They knew what was coming. Wallace walked among his men. He stopped to speak with soldiers, encouraging some, reassuring others. Many had followed him since Stirling Bridge. Tomorrow, they would follow him again. Not far away, the English camp was preparing as well. Edward's commanders expected victory. Their army was larger, and supported by England's feared longbowmen. For many English soldiers, Falkirk already felt one, but battles had a way of ignoring expectations. Midnight came, then the long hours before dawn. Few rested well. Some prayed. Some wrote final messages home, waiting for sunrise, waiting for history. And when the sun finally appeared, Scotland and England marched toward Falkirk. The morning sun rose over Falkirk. Two armies stood facing each other. Silence filled the valley between them. Wallace looked across the field. He understood what he was facing. Edward had brought everything: knights, infantry, and the longbowmen. Wallace gave his orders. The Scottish army formed into great spear circles. Spears pointed outward like a wall of death. The battlefield tightened with fear. Then the English advanced, slowly at first, then faster. The longbowmen moved into position. Both armies fully formed. The Scottish line held firm. Then the sky darkened. The first arrows were fired. Thousands followed. The Scottish shields rose. Arrows struck like rain. The ground filled with wood and blood. Wallace tried to hold the formation, but the sky kept firing. The Scottish front line began to shake. Edward watched from a distance. He did not rush. He waited for the archers to finish their work. The battlefield turned into chaos. Wallace realized the truth. This was not Stirling Bridge. This was something worse. And Falkirk was only beginning. The great Chilterns could not advance. It could only endure. Every volley weakened the line. Every minute cost more lives. Wallace refused to retreat. He believed the line could still hold. But Edward had been waiting for this moment. He raised his hand. The order spread across the English ranks. The cavalry moved first. Hundreds of armored horsemen thundered forward. The earth shook beneath them. Wallace's men lowered their sword. The first charge slammed into the Chilterns. Knights were thrown into the mud. But the Scottish line had been weakened. Edward saw it immediately. Another wave charged. More arrows rained down. The pressure became unbearable. One section of the line finally broke. Then another. Wallace raced toward the collapsing line. He shouted for his men to stand firm. Many obeyed. Many never heard him. The English army kept advancing. The Scottish position was beginning to crumble. Wallace knew the battle was slipping away. But he refused to abandon his men. Around him, Scotland fought with desperate courage. Yet courage alone could not stop Edward's army. By the evening, the outcome was becoming clear. Falkirk was no longer a battle for victory. It had become a battle for survival. Falkirk was over. Scotland had lost. Edward wasted no time. His army marched north. Town after town opened its gates. English banners returned. Royal orders spread quickly. Every sheriff received the same command: find Wallace. Capture him alive. Rewards were promised. Mercy was not. Across Scotland, fear returned. Families hid their sons. Doors closed before sunset. Travelers disappeared from the roads. But Wallace was still free. He never stayed in one place. One night in the forest, the next in the mountains. His followers became fewer, but they never abandoned him. They still believed. Scotland was not defeated. It was only wounded. Edward believed victory was complete. Wallace believed the war was not over. Two men, two visions of Scotland. Only one could prevail. And somewhere in the shadows, betrayal was already taking shape. Wallace never saw the Watcher, but someone saw everything. The message reached Edward's men. The hunt began. Riders spread across the forest. Wallace kept moving. Then, a sound. Horses. English soldiers. Wallace ran for the hills. His men covered the escape. Steel met steel. Wallace never looked back. The chase grew closer. One wrong step, and it would be over. Wallace reached the river. There was no bridge. No time to think. He jumped. The current carried him away. The English reached the bank. But he was gone. Edward's soldiers searched for days. They found nothing. Wallace had vanished again. Edward's anger only grew. New orders crossed Scotland. Capture Wallace, dead or alive. Months became years. But one mistake would end it all. Wallace escaped the soldiers, but he could not escape betrayal forever. 7 years had passed. Wallace was still free, but Scotland had changed. Many had surrendered. Wallace trusted only a few. One of them was lying. Gold changed everything. A secret deal was made. He believed he was safe. Wallace knew nothing. Then, horses. Faster. Silent. The camp was ambush. The camp was surrounded. Wallace reached for his sword. It was too late. His men fought desperately. Wallace fought back. But they kept coming. He was overwhelmed. Chained replaced sword. England had its prisoner. Word spread quickly. Edward finally smiled. The greatest rebel had fallen. Crowds watched in silence. No one dared to help. Wallace never lowered his head. The road led south, towards London, towards judgment, and toward immortality. The 23rd of August, 1305, London was waiting. They came to see a traitor. Scotland saw a hero. Wallace entered the city. He never bowed his head. The crowd shouted insults. Wallace stayed silent. Every street was packed. English soldiers surrounded him. There would be no escape. Wallace faced his judges. The charges were read aloud. Treason against the king. Wallace answered calmly. I was never his subject. The courtroom fell silent. The verdict never changed. Death. Wallace was led outside. Thousands gathered. Some cheered. Others watched in silence. Wallace looked toward the sky. He showed no fear. England could kill the man, but not the idea. Wallace's journey ended. His legend had just begun. Scotland would remember forever. Wallace was dead, but Scotland refused to forget. His name spread across the Highlands. Edward believed the rebellion was finished. He was wrong. Resistance was growing again. His name was Robert Bruce. Edward prepared for one final campaign. The old king marched north again. But age had finally caught him. Every mile became harder. On the 7th of July, 1307, the hammer of the Scots fell silent. England had lost its greatest warrior king. The crown passed to his son. But the new king was not his father. Scotland saw an opportunity. A greater war was about to begin, and England would soon face its greatest defeat in Scotland. Wallace was gone, but Scotland's fight had just begun next. Robert the Bruce.